Russian elites at some point just realized that they are looked at someone who gatekeeps oil and gas, but not someone, equal, who can join, the family of democracy. So actually, this Russian-Ukrainian and Russian-Western conflict, it's both-sided. It's not just Russia, being an aggressor or a bad neighbor or whatever. I mean, if you treat your kid or, treat your neighbor bad, there are more chances that he will grow up bad and will become a bad neighbor, right? So will Serbians be able to accept that much Russians? Poorer people come to you, right? They come for work. So Russians in Serbia, they don't come for work. Yeah. They come for a safe haven. Serbia gets more money, more investments, more buyers for the local businesses. If demand for apartments grow, then construction companies are going to build more apartments.
Okay, so today I have a pleasure of having as my guest Vlad Ayukaev. He's very many things, but one of them is the former CEO of PVC, also a founder of Multi-Sig Ventures, which is a VC fund, and a fintech expert as well, among, again, as I've mentioned, many other things. Welcome.
Thanks for having me today.
Of course. Now, the first question that I wanted to ask you, well, you've had a very diverse background. And I would consider you someone who is what I would call a tech nomad, which I think is a very, popular concept today. So your last destination has been Indonesia.
That's correct.
So can you give me a little bit of background, regarding Indonesia, but also your previous path up until then, and of course now?
Okay. So I think I've never tried to raise, any nomad title.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, I've been aware for the last 5 to 10 years about what that means. But my real goal, besides my movement, was always, trying to either get a better education or get a better job or do something more fun than I'm doing right now. But that is true that I try to stay away from, constraints and when I was a kid, I heard this quite famous saying that, I mean, if you follow an unusual path, you might end up on a harder one, but then you will feel less competition and you will see less crowd on your way. So I think that's something that was motivating me. So I was trying to do something that inspires me and is in an unusual way. So I was always up for going on an adventure. That's a proper way of looking at this. So I was born in Russia and mostly grew up there, but I got a lot of exposure when I was a kid to Western Hemisphere, and because of my family, because I was born in a region next to the border. So I always got this, an international mindset, and I think I was trying to use as much as possible out of it. So, but then when I was about to make a move and start thinking about my higher education, I decided that I want to get an American exposure, and I moved for a couple of years to Minneapolis, Minnesota, to do my bachelor's there at the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities. So that was, I think, it was a big move for me. And I studied computer science there, and I was working in a research lab, thinking about studying human-computer interaction and how our daily communication with machine, affects our lives. So, and when I was about to get done with my college degree, of course, there is a typical question that pops up, like what to do next. And usually, U.S. grads, they tend to stay in the States. So, but I was extremely I was interested in trying to get back to Europe and to Russia or somewhere close to it, because I had this concept that I want to bring back the utility and the skills that I learned. And I think again, this might be connected to my this childhood paradigm of trying to find less dense ways. But then I thought that what would a true capitalist do? Of course, he would go to the markets that he can get the biggest leverage and has the biggest impact.
Exactly.
Right? And then, of course, US is one of the, if not the most competitive markets on earth, especially in tech, right? In business and venture capital. So that's the standpoint that I used to. So and I chose to get back to Russia, and right away I got into another venture. So then I moved to Europe for some time, and I was working there on my ventures. And when the COVID stroke, I was trying to raise my venture fund, and then it didn't go quite well from the first attempt, and I got a chance to go to Asia. And again, the same paradigm. Why not? Why not trying the emerging market, and why not trying to get into something completely different? And I took it. So that's how I ended up working and studying on 3 continents.
Got it. And what would you say? So before you jump into your experience in Indonesia, so what would you say are the core differences in the education between Russia and the U.S.? What was that propelled you to say, I want to continue my education in the US, but I also want to bring that education back to my roots?
Well, I mean, if you look at the way Russian educational system works, it's mostly based on the Soviet system, and which, in fact, based on the old Russian imperial system, which is based on German system. So it has multiple steps. But I think the biggest and most interesting quality of its system to us is that I would say it's not flexible, right? So, I mean, of course, it's becoming more flexible, but still, comparing to the American colleges and even European now, it is really strict. So you are given, based on the subject that you chose, you are given like what courses you're taking, and the timeline that you have to take to get your diploma and so on. So it's a very strict, pre-paved system, right? In contrast, in the States, it's quite flexible. So you're picking your major, you're picking your college. You can go to science and engineering. You can go to medical school. You can go to lib art college. But then inside the college, there's a lot of flexibility. So you can study computer science and at the same time, attend astronomy classes or history classes or English poetry, and that's going to be absolutely fine. And it's perceived by the community in the college, university, that's something not unusual, right? In Russia, it's more or less strict. So I'm actually not sure how it is in Serbia and former Yugoslavia, but I assume that it was also quite strict, right?
So I believe it is. So in terms of the university, I also have zero insight into how that experience looks like. But to your point, I think it's very structured. I think you cannot go outside of your major or outside of your chosen line of education. So I would completely agree with you in terms of the flexibility. I mean, I would go one step further and say, because I left personally when in my 3rd year of high school. And here you would have 14 courses with 2 foreign languages, and there you would have 5 courses per semester, and you would have 2 semesters, and it was a completely night and day. So
my example how this empowered me and made my educational experience more insightful was mythology classes. So while studying computer science and focusing on human-computer interaction, I was also studying mythology, namely Scandinavian mythology or Germanic mythology. So, and I think of course, I mean, I grew up to be a manager in tech, but the skills and knowledge that I learned in my, mythology classes are as much useful as my hard skills I learned in my engineering classes, because there I learned what are people interested in, so that all myths are revolving around crime, punishment, sex, and those kind of stuff, because that's what people. That's the fundamentals of human nature. So, and myths, they teach us. It's a useful stories, right? That teach us something, and this flexibility of the course load, I think, helped me to explore different areas that then ended up in a diverse experience. So that's something. I think it's number one difference.
Yeah, you become a more complete individual, in my opinion. You're allowed that diversity so that you're not, constrained.
Mm-hmm. And the second difference is, of course, the amount of money that flows into the U.S. educational sector.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, even though Minnesota is a good school, it's not the top one or top 3 school, right?
Mm-hmm.
But still, it has a really nice infrastructure, really nice equipment in the labs, and world-renowned professors that are teaching you something that smaller school in Russia,
mm-hmm.
outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, might not be able to afford.
Yeah.
So and I bet it's the same in here. But then it comes at a price.
Yeah. So you've called in one of your interviews Indonesia terra incognita for the Western world. So I really, I think I haven't visited that part of Asia at all. And truth be told, I'm only interested in seeing Japan from that side. But because my mom's been to India and some of my friends have been to Bali. So I have zero familiarity about, Jakarta in Indonesia outside of Bali, outside of the glamour of the influencers and the holistic healers and whatnot. So I would love to hear about, your experience there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Indonesia is for sure a terra incognita, especially for entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
especially coming from our European background.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think your experience with Japan, what you mentioned, is exactly when we ask a typical Westerner what Asia is, he'll think of Japan, Korea, South Korea, and now maybe China, right? But Indonesia or countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, Vietnam, or Thailand, so that encompass this region of Southeast Asia, they're not as popular as a destination, especially for business.
Yeah.
Right? There's Bali, there is Singapore, but then not that many people think of investing or working in this region. But in reality, this is one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing region on Earth in terms of GDP, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look for the past couple of years on Indonesia and its neighbors, their GDP growth would be from 5 to 6 or 7%. Mm-hmm. So that's on a factor of 2 or 3 bigger than GDP growth in Europe or North America.
Yeah.
So those regions are flourishing right now, and they get a lot of investments from China, from Singapore, from its neighbors, and I think a lot of manufacturing is moving there. So, for example, if you look at where Japanese car giants produce their cars, you'll be amazed. But that's Thailand or Indonesia, right? So a lot of the tech is heavy tech infrastructure is moving there, right? So that's why I actually think that if you're looking for something to build with high risk, high reward, Southeast Asia is a way to be. It's a place to be. So, and my experience was there. So we were running a fintech company, or I sometimes like to mention it to be a fintech studio, because it was actually close to a venture studio concept, because under one roof we housed multiple businesses.
Yeah.
Right. Even though they were all connected to each other and they were in the same B2B2C fintech space, but then they were different, and they serve different audiences. So yeah, and I think it's a successful experience for me. I mean, almost 5 years in Jakarta.
Yeah.
And I'll be happy to talk about how the culture works there and what we're building.
So specifically, let me just ask you, because I feel like fintech, especially in that area, is an untapped market. Meaning, culturally, I feel like, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, people are still used to monetary, fiat, paying with cash.
A lot of them, yes.
Right. So how do you tackle those some I would call them inefficiencies in the market, but compared to how much I spend on my card compared to cash, it's night and day. So how do you tackle them in the market, and how do you get merchants to use your apps, and how do you get consumers to convert from cash?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we should trace back in history and look how this financial technology sector was evolving in Europe and North America. So there were travel checks, right? There were bank accounts, and then at some point in the 80s, the card, plastic card, debit card starts to kicking in. And then, of course, there was this big work done by Visa, Master, and American Express, integrating different banks and different financial institutions to make this world payment network, right? But Southeast Asia was lagging behind in this, and I think they actually transferred through this checks and debit cards era.
Mm-hmm.
And when technology finally came there in late 2000, early 2010s, there was already concept of e-money there.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the consumers are unbanked. And they unbanked for many reasons there. So of course, there are banks in Indonesia, and they were there for dozens of years before even the internet became a thing. But most of the Indonesians were unbanked back then. So they didn't have the proper documents, or the bank was just simply too far away, right? Indonesia is still heavily an agriculture country.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people live outside of the urban areas, right?
So are these state banks, by the way, or are they privatized now?
Both. There are a lot of, I would say that initially when Indonesia became independent after the Dutch colonial rule, it was mostly government-controlled banks. But now there are big banks that are privately owned. So, most of the population just transitioned through classy bank accounts. They passed cards, they passed checks, and when it was growing in 2000 and 2010s, it was already an e-money concept. And right now, I think e-money is the most popular digital way of payment in Indonesia. Yes, cash is still the king, especially outside of big areas. And I can comfortably say that, outside of Java and Bali, 80% of transactions, if not more, are cash. So, but e-money is number one, unlike cards like here or in the States. So e-money will be the king of the digital payments in Southeast Asia. And this is not this story is typical for neighboring countries like the Philippines or Vietnam or Thailand.
So could you just break down e-money? So compared to me having, let's say, an account with my bank in Serbia, would you equate e-money with me having money in PayPal or Revolut? What would e-money be really?
So I mean, that's the trick.
That is the trick.
From from the customer point of view, user experience point of view, e-money might not be any different from a bank.
Okay.
Yeah. But from the regulatory perspective, bank is a very serious financial institution, right? That has a lot of injected capital to sustain crises, that accumulates a lot of deposits and can provide loans, right? But e-money is a lightweight of a checking account.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, you can draw a parallel between a classic bank checking account without any other bank products, banking products, and e-money. So essentially, yeah, e-money is a wallet it's your wallet in the financial institution that shows the amount of money you put on that wallet that you can spend, but there are very strict limitations on what you can do with this wallet. So this wallet usually has some strict boundaries, like it cannot exceed, let's say, $1,000 in local currencies.
Mm-hmm.
So bank account can be 1,000, dozens of thousands, 100 million, right? But e-money are usually limited.
Mm-hmm.
And then QIC, and that's an interconnected issue. QIC is less harsh on e-money, right? If we only allow a user to spend his pocket money, then we might not know as much information. We might not seek as much information about him. Versus in a typical classic bank, you providing a services of transferring money overseas, right, or domestic, and there might be huge sums, so you must know a lot about your customers, who you're dealing with. So that's the biggest difference. So essentially, e-money is just a simple electronic wallet that has a lot of limitations, but in low and middle income countries like Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, e-money solves 99% of your problems, right? So if an average salary in the country, let's say $500, and e-money allows you to have 1,000 or 2, then it's 4 months of your take-home pay that can be stored on that wallet.
So what you're saying really is, if you're a person that's debanked and you're on an average salary, you have really no savings.
Yeah.
Wow.
But you have to spend this money electronically, right?
Yeah.
So and e-money are cheaper too, because if you look at the bank and look at the popular payment networks like Master or Visa, so they charge you fees, right? And those fees are usually called like merchant discount rates, and you don't see them, but in reality, there is always someone who is paying 1 or 2% out of your transaction.
Exactly.
So, and in e-money, this fee can be way less. It's cheaper to support this network, and the technology behind it is just simpler.
I mean, now that you're saying it, I am honestly, the process that I have to go through in order to spend my money at face value is insane, even in Serbia, because as you know, the Visa Europe is tied to the euro. That's right. Subsequently, all of the banks are tied to the euro. So what that means, when I have dollars on my bank account and I go to the US, I'm getting charged 4% on my transaction.
Yeah.
Because they're buying the bid on the dollar. I can't spend my dollars, is what I'm saying. So I have to buy the euro and then buy back the dollar, which is insane. And I explained to my friends, I'm like, and I talked to the bank, I'm like, if I have dollars on my bank account, why can't I spend them? They're like, because we're fixed to the euro. We have to convert them to the euro first. And it's like this fool's game. It's crazy.
When we talk about those issues, I like to look at perception of money in our sector, in financial sector, as a product. So for us, really, money is a movable good.
Yeah.
People in their day-to-day life, they look at money as a stored value of their work, effort. Some people look at it as a way of, building something with, right? But really, in fintech, money is a good that we move.
Yeah.
And then if you have to move your value from US dollars to euro, that means the money, has to transfer thousands of kilometers. So, and if you look from this perspective, then you understand why you're being charged. So when you pay your card, when you travel abroad and you pay with your card, that means money will be moving from one country to another, and then there are risks associated with that. It can be hacked, stolen, whatever. So there are multiple financial institutions engaged in this transfer and this logistics, financial logistics, and of course you have to pay for that. Like if you dig into this and the amount of effort that are done by numerous institutions to provide you this such transactions, just like paying for a Starbucks, you'll be amazed. And actually, it's quite cheap. Like in 2024, almost 2025, 1 or 2%, I think it's quite cheap. So before you would probably pay 10 or 15% to move money from America to Japan, like let's say 100 years ago.
So
now it's efficient. We live in an efficient era.
Got it. Well, let me put it this way. So with platforms like Revolut, then what's their edge? Because when I Google, FX exchange for euro to dollar on Revolut, it's the same that I get on Google. So if Revolut was available in Serbia, I wouldn't have to pay the bank this absurd conversion rate. To me, it's more than 1 to 2%, which I think is super expensive on each transaction. So for companies like Revolut, how do they get that edge?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't exactly know their P&L, but I can make safe assumptions. So first, banks not only make money out of transactions, right? But they make money out of storing your money as well.
Yeah.
So for them, money always works overnight, over the week, over the course of the year. So, and that's something that we call working capital, right? When bank gets your deposit, and it might be in different forms. It might be in euro, in dollars, in might be in crypto. So when the bank gets your deposits, then they start moving and they start working for the bank.
Mm-hmm.
So and if something is provided free or really cheap for you as a service, let's say neobanks forex rates like Revolut, right? Then it's a good question how did they make their money?
Exactly.
And obviously they make money somewhere else. So they make money by issuing you a credit card. They make money by allocating your funds somewhere and getting percentage out of this, right? So they make money by lending your funds to someone else, of course. Exactly. So that's what it is.
Yeah, when you say lending your money to someone else, it's incredible to think how these corporations that we have their products or we drink their products. Apple and Starbucks are also banks. And people don't know this because people put their money on their Apple card or people put their money on their Starbucks card, and that money is going to work.
Actually, there is a famous issue or incident associated with that in Indonesia. So at some point, I think before COVID or during the COVID, Starbucks reward program was shut down for some time in Indonesia because their local regulator insisted that it should be counted as a e-money wallet, and though they should get the proper license. Yeah, because they do accumulate dollars, rupiah, or euro on their reward card, and then they might get use of it, right? So essentially, it's what's important, you can buy goods with this.
With the Starbucks card?
With the Starbucks card.
Wow. Okay.
So, I mean, even if it's at Starbucks, you still can acquire goods, right? So then it's a way of payment. Therefore, it's a way of payment that has to be legalized and regulated and secured. So
So on that note, because that's one of the ways that I would say the state impedes progress, because if a company such as Starbucks comes in and they can't really do their business the way they do it in other regions, they're definitely going to kind of maybe pull back on what they invest. So how did you tackle in Indonesia the cultural differences in doing business? Because I would say like you and me have a lot more similarity on a business front, cultural, socioeconomical front than you and an Indonesian per se. So how do you integrate your experience and try to overcome the standing or the status quo that's there?
Yeah. I think the biggest difference that you have to address is the way of Indonesian people and Southeast Asians in general doing business. So if you look at our culture, our business culture, it's more or less individualistic, right? There, it's very communal. So it's actually the same in India, for example. Famously, like Indian CEOs or managers are really nice, right? Like if you look at big tech in the States, you'll find a lot of Indian managers because, I mean, they always try to reach a consensus, right? They always try to make each party happy. And for them, the concept of win-win transaction is really natural, organic. So for us, there is more or less one party that wins. Of course, the second also should win, but if it loses, that's fine, right? So, and it creates a really slow-paced business dynamics when it takes time for different actors of a specific business transaction to reach an agreement to, balance on what is going on and reach a conclusion. And that's why for us Europeans, doing business in Indonesia might look really slow and sometimes like a circus. Like, what are you guys discussing? Come on, we have this simple transaction, yes or no. But that's from our individualistic point of view, right? We want to push forward and get our gains, profit as soon as possible. For them, it's more of a factor. Let's talk about it. What are we going to win? What is our community going to win? What if our community loses? We should also keep in mind that Indonesia is one of a few Asian countries that is a Muslim country, right? Together with Malaysia, for example. Islam has a long history of entrepreneurship, and of course, it also affects the way they do business. So they always try to find profit for all the sides in a specific business transaction, and it makes it really slow. So I usually like to say that in Indonesia, if you want to do something, you should multiply it by 3.14. Yeah. So if it takes one day here, it might take up to a week there. So that's okay. But a lot of people underestimate this, and of course, European and American investors like putting their money in Asia, they might be searching for a fast outcome, but it's not happening. And then they start raising question, what is wrong? In reality, nothing is wrong. It just, the time flow is different. The time flow is different, and that's what it is.
Yeah. So you really can't, move fast and break things in Indonesia because of the process. I mean, I think, in a state where now comparing kind of Serbia, where also there's immense amounts of regulations and bureaucracy and documentation. I think that, that's why the US in some capacity, the pace of progress as an individual or your creation is, a factors faster than anywhere else really still.
Well, and then you asked me in the beginning, like how to, tackle this problem. I think in reality, you cannot change the business ecosystem, especially in a foreign country, right? So you have to accept the rules.
Yeah.
So the answer, how to tackle it, you accept what it is, and you have to find good local partners that you can rely on that can kind of walk you through this culture. And the best option that I saw is doing things in parallel. So if you can run multiple projects, just do it.
Yeah. So
if you just focus on one, that might not work in that specific, Southeast Asian culture. So we'll focus on multiple projects, maybe, on multiple streams within one project. Try to make parallel processes. So if one stops, another moves, and you can shift focus in between. So.
Yeah, now that you're walking me through it, it's almost it's almost this process as a person, as a business person, that you need to assimilate, integrate, and then cooperate. Versus in a fast-moving environment, you can disrupt, attack, and produce. where the words carry a different weight. One is very communal, and the other is very individual, as you've said. So it's it's interesting to hear how your experience there, considering your background. So Serbia, how did that come about?
Well, right now, so I exited my fintech firm in Indonesia, the venture studio that I was talking about, and actually got in this like to say gap year, or this period of my life when I am thinking about my new ventures while taking a break and maybe finishing my inner stuff or my hobbies or something that I did not allocate a lot of time before, that are nevertheless as much important as my career and stuff that I'm building. And here Serbia became as a perfect place to spend half a year or a year while this conflict between Russia and Ukraine and Russia and the West goes on. So, and I really find Serbia, hospitable and attractive for Russian speakers. And I decided that there is a big community of people that, I can become friends with, that, I can have fun with while taking a break. And just Serbia was a very organic, I think, very logical point of destination.
Have you been to Serbia beforehand, or is this your first time when you came in?
So technically, I was in Serbia before, but first I came to Serbia last year. I think it was last November, when I already start looking for next move. So I came specifically to Serbia to understand whether it's going to be possible for me to move here and spend half a year or a year with my gap in career. So, and I tested it multiple times, and I think I came another time in the spring. So I looked how the winter here, how the spring here, and then I finally moved in the end of June.
Got it. Yeah, I really want to hear your perspective. When, obviously Serbia has been in the 90s, but predominantly 2000s, war-ridden and, directly bombarded by NATO and the US. And a vast number of people emigrated to Austria, to the US, to Canada, and a lot of them stayed there. So what's your opinion on, because I think there's a very large now Russian commune in Serbia. What do you think about, as time goes on and hopefully, the war ends quite soon and things go back to a semblance of normal in the next 5 years, hopefully, or even earlier. Do you see, Russians staying or going back home?
That's a good question. So as a professional immigrant, I like to say that, your biggest immigration crisis usually comes in a year or two at most. So when you leave your country, and actually I'll be interested to hear more from you on this, but when you leave your country for the first time, then approximately in a year or two, you start really, missing everything, right? So everything was better at home. Especially if you're already a grown-up immigrant. So like just the trees were greener, the roads were wider, and the air was fresher. So everything just was better there. So people like to taste their food. People miss their songs, TV, everything. But that peaks in a year or two, and after 2 year passes, I think you get used to your new home, and then if you come back to your motherland after 2 or more years abroad, you start noticing differences. That nothing. This is not good here. Like I like how it is in Serbia or Indonesia or in the States, and that's why I think this question And the answer to is really depend on the time. How much time really spent by immigrants in a new destination. So now it's been already what, third year, right?
Third year, yeah,
of war, and it's going to be fourth year soon.
Yeah,
right. So I think by this time, most of the people are going to stay elsewhere. So that's the answer, and I think both for Russians and for Ukrainians as well. So it doesn't mean they're going to stay in their first, in the country of their first choice or their first move, right? So let's say they moved from Russia or Ukraine to Serbia or Germany or Indonesia, Canada. It doesn't mean they're going to stay there, but they'll be immigrants from now on, and it's very likely that they're gonna keep moving or staying in the country that they already are and not going back.
Yeah, it's such a, I haven't had to resonate with what you're saying. Actually,
what can you say about Yugoslavian immigrants from the Balkanic Wars? What happened to them?
Yeah, the same thing that you're mentioning. I mean, let me look at my experience with the people that I've met there in the U.S. So when I left there for high school, I was miserable. I mean, it was literally in New Hampshire, in the middle of nowhere, 60 miles out of any civilization. So that was a really, it was a beautiful campus, a beautiful school, but I was surrounded by 300 people and nobody else. But when I went to college, then things obviously changed and my world expanded, and I got used to, this new identity that I not created, but that I assimilated with what I was in Serbia, right? So the people that I met there, Serbians, retained, the person that they were, but also, of course, as you mentioned, learned how to live in that new environment because they had no longing anymore, and they weren't thinking about, when's the moment that I'm going to go back. So there is, I think, a critical kind of a time frame where that process of nostalgia turns into your new life.
Yeah.
So it's pretty standard,
and you become afraid of reintegration process.
Exactly.
Of going back. I don't know, like, what will people think of me, or how's my identity going to change again? And when you relate to your experience of first moving out, I mean, I think it's a I wouldn't say horrific, but it's a strange experience. Yeah, you feel like you burnt all ties to your previous motherland, and then you are one more time thinking of moving, and then it brings up all those bad emotions, and you're afraid, how am I going to move back, right?
Man, you're saying the exact same thing that I went through. I mean, I left when I was 16, and coming back, I was the Vuk that my closest friends and whatever, my acquaintances and other people that I knew, he's the guy that was that guy. But, so much time has passed and so many things have happened, and I'm no longer that singular person. And it's dangerous when you're, I needed to go back from the U.S. to Serbia, and it was not a rough, because I had a good base, but a pretty hard reintegration process, because you need to relearn how to live in that old environment where you were, and so many things have gone through, and especially there's a considering the library that you have behind you, I don't read literature in Serbian, and I haven't done so in more than a decade. So you get linguistically, my emotional being is also a bit more tied to actually my US and English background than Serbian. And for people here, they're like, man, what kind of nonsense are you speaking about? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you're a Vuk, you're Serbian, you speak Serbian. I'm like, yes, and yes, but there are nuances which people, unfortunately, that don't have that background don't get.
They can relate to you. That's big trouble.
Yeah. So on just to go back on the note, so the one thing that I've also am trying to understand from your perspective is, so considering that a lot of people will stay, and I don't know the exact number of how many Russians are in Serbia. Now, obviously, these people are, I would say, from tech background. Some of them are pretty affluent, meaning when they're coming to Serbia, they're coming really to Belgrade. And that brings up a lot of positives, new communes, new restaurants, just a completely new vibration. But also you're getting displacement of previous locals, potentially people that are not high earners. This is a cycle where you're really walking that line between infringing on an environment and making your stamp and really assimilating and trying to work with the existing infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So how do you see, obviously none of us can predict the future, but considering that a vast number of Russians have moved to Belgrade, how do you see that progression of coexisting?
Yeah, I think, and that can be tied up to your first question, is whether those people will stay. And then now we learned that we both think that they will stay.
Yeah.
But then the question is, will they stay in Serbia? And I think the odds that they will are quite high. And another question on the Serbian side, like, will Serbians be able to accept that much Russians? Because I think Serbia was mostly a net negative immigration destination. Like, people were living former Yugoslavia. I mean, of course, there was some influx of people coming from other parts of former Yugoslavia to Serbia, right? Serb nationals running away from Croatia and other countries. But now it's a different story. So Serbia net accepting people that are, yes, they are quite close in terms of culture, but it seems there is a big difference, right? So, and we should, I cannot answer your question without talking about this as well. Mm-hmm. From a Russian perspective, again, my position here in the community is a bit different because I'm actually spending my time learning about Serbia, having fun here, traveling around Serbia. But I didn't come here because of a need, but a lot of people did come here, and we can call them refugees, political refugees or war refugees, right? So they would be happy to stay back at home in Moscow, St. Petersburg, but they chose Serbia because they have their own views on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine and how they want to be not part of it. But I think that, so this is a really interesting situation when we have really, and then it's, I think, okay to say that most of those people are from somewhat wealthy backgrounds, right? Yeah. Because not that many Russians have passports to travel, first of all. I think it's roughly 20% of the population that have the
Wow, I didn't even know.
Yeah, it's actually,
wow.
It would be interesting for our Serbian viewers because in Serbia, probably everyone has a passport to travel to Montenegro or Croatia or neighboring countries, right? Because you guys are so interconnected. But most of the Russians stay their entire life at home, and like in the States, they didn't travel, so they don't have passports.
Yeah.
And out of those 20%, you're probably taking 10 top percent that can have funds not only to travel, but to travel and rent a new apartment, relocate, buy stuff and live, have a savings to afford this. So, and of course, most likely it's safe to say that those people are more wealthy than average local living in Belgrade.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, again, a tricky situation. Usually countries face different type of immigration when poorer people come to you, right? They come for work. So Russians in Serbia, they don't come for work.
Yeah.
They come for a safe haven where they can wait while the bad things go away. Actually, I think about it, it's interesting. This is really an outlier from the world of immigration.
Absolutely.
But
absolutely,
for Russian-Serbian immigration, it already happened in 1918.
Okay.
After the World War I, when Russian Empire fell and the communist regime arose, then I think a lot of Russians that were wealthy and they were not agreeing with the new communist rule, they also run away to Serbia.
So I didn't know this.
That's the second wave, I think, of the immigration. Yeah. So that's a question. So how do we accommodate those wealthy hipster Russians that came to Belgrade? And yeah, I think it's really. I wouldn't expect anything else than raising prices on apartment, on services, because people bring money.
Yeah.
The other side of it, that there are local Serbians that also take their part in this grid, and there are, if you say that some locals are getting moved out of their apartments or kicked out, that means there is an owner who...
That's because the landlords want more money.
Is greedy and
exactly.
he accepts a bigger, better price, a bigger deal, right? But I think in the end, from the economical point of view, no matter what, the amount of taxes that are going to be paid to Serbia and the amount of money that are brought on the streets, they clear out all other risks associated with that. So Serbia gets more money, more investments, more buyers for the local businesses. Yes, at the expense of the least protected, least wealthy locals. Yes, and that's sad, but I mean that's ultimately the government job to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now the stress will go down because economy tends to fix itself, right? So if demand for apartments grow, then construction companies are going to build more apartments.
Yeah,
and then the price will ultimately go down. So and also I think it's really there are other things that affect the pricing these days, right? We live in a world of stagflation where inflation is really high, but the economic growth is also having hard times catching up with the growth of the past. So it's easy to associate all inflation and all prices grow with those bad immigrants are coming here, and it's easy to just point on those Russians and say, oh, I mean, it's just, those guys are just buying for cheap our stuff. But in reality, they're not the only source of the inflation.
No, it's a misconception. It's a misconception
everywhere. Yeah. But true. I think Belgrade is, still comparing to the amount of people that came, and I think it's safe to point that there are maybe, I think, dozens of thousands for sure in Belgrade, right? Maybe even 100,000.
There's definitely more than 100,000.
A lot of people do.
Officially, I think the number that I looked at about 6 months ago was like 80,000, which cannot be the case. It's way more than
people that have permits,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
But there are a lot of people that do visa run and
visa runs, which what a crazy concept. I mean, it's just.
So I'd say it's 100K people more, and for people of what 1.5, 1.7 million, 2 at most. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, but what do you think? Will Serbians be able to integrate them into Serbian society and accommodate them?
No, I was more asking, this is, I think, to your point, after the fact, right? I think the crisis of displacement or the rising living standards and the rising prices with those living standards have happened in the last 3 years. And I think that we're now at the tail end where we have a sort of a base forming where things are starting to work in a cohort, right? And there's really no, I think, disruption from a standpoint of the local anymore at this point. And I think that, as I've mentioned, considering how the people that they've came in have not jump-started, but worked towards the existing economy is really great. There's a number of spots that opened up in this neighborhood that are Russian and that I love, and that not only Russians visit but also Serbians come to. So it's any of these limitations or barriers have kind of been crossed, and people have intermingled to a point where we're really a metropolitan international city, I think. And to your point, we don't have an issue yet of immigrants looking to settle from the lower case of society, but rather we have the complete opposite issue. So yeah, I think that in the future, I don't see any problems with that.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, of course, there is a lot of mythology, how Serbians and Russians are brothers and sisters, and I mean, we should probably not comment on this.
Yeah.
But the truth is that, yeah, there are not that many conflicts that are hitting the public, at least. And that surprises me a lot. Because if you look at other countries, like Indonesia, Bali, there's always those bad Russian tourists. Now, like in America or in Western Europe, there's always like bad Russians, mafia or whatever doing stuff. But here it's really, I think, we're doing so far a really good job.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I have in mind is what should Serbia do to maximize the profit out of this, historical exodus of Russians to Serbia? Because if you get 100,000 qualified, professionals with some money to invest, like how should you get the biggest use of it? And here, I think that there are some stuff that's lacking. Maybe
it is,
at least from the language perspective. I think Serbia is not. I mean, the government is not doing enough to maybe provide free language courses to those people. I try to make them more Serbs than they are right now. Because if you look at countries like Sweden or Germany or even Spain, you'll find, well, of course, they used to massive immigration inflow, right? And they build factories that standardize the immigration experience and try to integrate people in their societies. And the cultural difference there is huge, right? Usually it's like Syrians coming to Sweden, or people from Africa coming to Spain. Of course, they're also great immigrants, but then the cultural difference is huge. Here we have for sure a narrower gap. We speak Slavic language. We both use Cyrillic. We have common history that we can understand. But Serbia is just not used to it, right? And maybe some tools for the integration are not there. And one of the things I'm afraid of that Serbia might not be fast enough, to localizing those people and making them, really integrate into the economy.
Into the society.
Yeah, that's...
into the society, into the economy. And to your point, like there's no really fiscal also leniency to new businesses. It's the subsidies and the leniencies are happening on the front of our expats coming back. Right. So, for example, if you're a Serbian that hasn't paid taxes in 7 years, if you come back, the employer doesn't need to pay, or rather pays only 30% of what he would usually pay for taxes for 5 years. So, but for the vast amount of Russians that came in, you really have no leniency in hiring Russians or Serbians or building a business. It's. I mean, I'm not saying it should be a twofold system, but across the board, they should reformulate it in a way that it's more, it's easier to start a business and potentially lower the taxes, because the employee taxes are in 60% on the ground.
And I think, to be honest, it's an easy low-hanging fruit right now. So after Serbia joins the European Union sometime in the future, it will see more immigrants coming. Yeah, and those immigrants not gonna be, let's say, us bratka to Serbians as Russians and Ukrainians are, and right now is a cheap opportunity in terms of effort and money to build this, immigrant factory, right? And make locals understand what immigrants are bringing. I don't know, provide tools for the faster immigration, integration, and then maybe polish, clarify the laws on residency and citizenships and all that. So I think that the Serbian government has all they won in the lottery, to be honest, and they have all the tools that they need to seize this opportunity, but they just have to act faster.
Got it.
They have to run for it.
Got it.
Because if nothing happens within the next years, people just move to other countries, to the Canada, US, or Germany, and that's going to be the end of it.
Got it. And so I want to touch on a point that we've now discussed. This intermingling and vast migrations in cycles of big conflicts, wars, etc. So in what I could see in media, for example, when the war started, my predominant viewpoint was, the U.S. wanted to the U.S. wanted the Ukraine to be like a defensive bulwark and join NATO, right? Since 2008, since even the Bush era. And I viewed that, through the news cycle as being the predominant cause of the Russian aggression to Ukraine, right? But when we mention these migration ebbs and flows and considering the fall of the Soviet state, what are some of the hidden causes of this conflict that people are not taking into consideration?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a complicated topic, and the conflict is still ongoing, so we don't know how it's going to unfold in the future. But there are something we can talk about it right now, and I like to look at it. I'm not by any means a political expert, but I'm an immigrant and a business person who experienced all the negative parts of the conflict. I think that one of the angle that we can look at it, and which is not popular, especially in the Western media, is kind of dissolution of the Soviet Union way of looking at it. So, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. It was a huge empire, huge landmass of people with different cultures, and I think Serbians can relate to that because they also lived in Yugoslavia, where there was the pan-Yugoslavian idea of Broz Tito, and Soviet Union was doing that at least 20 years before Yugoslavia, right? So they were trying to pack a lot of people to live under one roof.
Yeah.
And then the Soviet Union collapsed because of economical problems within a week. And a lot of the countries, all Russian neighbors, became independent. We started from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and go all the way to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, right? And the Middle East countries. But I think the dissolution of the Soviet Union was never properly digested. So, and then it wasn't digested in Russia, and it was not digested in our neighbors, right? And then politics on the both sides of the border, of course, in Russia and in Ukraine here and in other countries, they decided to go the easy way, I would say, and follow the nationalist agenda. That Russian agenda was that we get free from those small countries, so we now can build a Russian state, and our neighbors' agenda was that we finally got away from the Soviet oppression, from the Moscow oppression. Now we're independent, and we build our own country. And the amount of bridges that and ties that were cut are just tremendous. And then politicians, again, at both sides of the borders, they used this politics and relied on it for many years. And then Mr. Putin came to power in Russia, and they just stayed on this platform that we are building national states, and I think at some point they just couldn't resist getting into the conflict that we see right now.
Yeah.
And then there was third parties, spectators like European Union and
United States,
the states that had their own agenda there. So if any, their agenda was to maybe weaken the Russia, and they did it well. So yes, they were igniting, they were trying to at least ignite anti-Russian rhetoric in those states that just a couple of years ago were part of the bigger country led by Russians. So
yeah, sorry to interrupt, when we were speaking, off camera, You said, I think, a great saying. These are the echoes of the fall of the Soviet Union. And also, I believe that you told me that I haven't seen it, and I haven't searched for it. There are videos and there's recorded history of Putin saying that he wants to join the European Union and being impeded by the
NATO,
people.
and even NATO, actually.
Even NATO. So it's just, there needs to exist, division needs to exist in order for war to be kept funded.
So the first way of looking at this is this, again, this is an echo of the Soviet Union collapse, and we're still dealing with those, neighbor conflicts. But the angle that you popped up right now, it's the second great angle, that this might look as like a story of Western countries not being able to fully integrate Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed, right? So again, like right now we're talking about Georgia, Ukraine, or the Baltic states that offered European Union extension plan, right? They are candidates. I think Moldova is a candidate state, And those topics were in place in late 1990s and early 2000s about Russia, but it never happened. So that never progressed. And I think Russian elites at some point just realized that, they are looked at someone who gatekeeps oil and gas, but not someone, equal, who can join, the family of democracies, Of course, again, and there is a point of it, like a typical liberal will say at this point that, well, Russia is not a democracy, so it was not offered a path to be among families of democracies. But I mean, if you treat your kid or, treat your neighbor bad, there are more chances that he will grow up bad and will become a bad neighbor, right? So that's exactly what happened. So no matter what, it was Putin or Western country that first called Russia not democratic. I mean, the more it happened, the more this evolved, and the more conflict it raised. So that's why I think it's actually this Russian-Ukrainian and Russian-Western conflict. It's both-sided. It's not just Russia, being an aggressor or a bad neighbor or whatever we'll say, but it's EU or America not wanting and not able to accommodate, Russia and find a proper place for it in its worldview as they see it. So I think both are collapsed. So it's our internal post-Soviet conflict, and then it's external post-Soviet conflict as well.
So on that note, if we come to the first point of the echoes, right, of the fall of the Soviet Union, so with these huge communities and enclaves of Russians in all of these past Soviet Union states, some of them being in 20 or 30% of the population body.
For example, like in Baltic states.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you solve that without the annexation of the two countries, complete annexation, complete division, and or the remarrying of the two? What's the solution there?
I think the right way of looking at it, or at least something that worked before, is the Germany, Austria, Switzerland kind of way of co-living together, right? So of course there are going to be people who will, punch me in the face for saying that, Austrians and Germans are really alike, but for sure, I mean, they share one root, right? They're all like Germanic people, and a lot of German speakers live in Switzerland, but nevertheless, they have their own independence. And I mean, Switzerland was an example for the last couple hundred years, building their own country. So it's essentially, it's a state. It's an example of very close nations living in multiple states, right? Or one nation at some point being segregated into multiple states and successfully co-living, co-neighboring each other. But this hasn't happened yet for Russians, right? There are a lot of Russians living in the Baltic states, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, in Ukraine, in Moldova. But I think a little measures were taken by those countries to kind of properly integrate their Russian citizens into the newly built national states, right?
Yeah.
So that's how to frame it correctly. So if we look at, for example, Sweden and Finland, Finland was at some point part of Swedish kingdom, right? And before getting independent, it was Swedish territory. And when Finland became independent, they took it seriously to care for their Swedish minority. And right now, Swedish is the official second language in Finland, even though only a few number of Finns speak Swedish at home, right? I'm not sure exactly, but I would say less than 5% of Finnish population speaks Swedish at home. So then we look at Ukraine, right, or Baltic states, where more than 5% for sure. It's a double-digit number of native Russians that speak Russian at home, but they were not offered this, opportunity to utilize their mother language in courts, in public life, right, in politics, and that's, I think, that's one of the roots of that conflict for sure.
Yeah.
The proper way of solving is, of course, is giving more rights to these significant minorities. So
political representation,
themselves.
educational representation, just integration in society, which allows coexistence.
And that would give them a lot of opportunities to blame the current Russian state and Mr. Putin especially. They would be able to say that, hey, we have a lot of Russians here. Look, they prosper within our European community. They are European Union citizens. They can study Russian culture, embrace their culture, which is a great culture. Of course, they can embrace it here safely at home. So, and what have you achieved so far, right? But now they can't say that. So unfortunately, most of the Russian neighbors just took the easy path again, titling Russia as a bad neighbor and a bad guy, and saying that we want to stay as far away as possible.
Yeah.
So which ultimately is a bad path, because 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we don't know what's going to happen, but we can say for sure that Russia is going to be a Ukrainian neighbor and a Belarusian neighbor and Polish neighbor. So unfortunately or fortunately, none of these countries will move to Texas or Latin America. So they'll stay there and they'll have to solve it.
Yeah.
So, but yes, I think good solution is to look at how other countries like Austria, Germany, and Switzerland, they handle this. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting and I think beneficial to hear this perspective, because nowadays, unfortunately, people, depending on which side of the political spectrum they are, they want black and whites. They want definitives, and they don't allow for nuances. And there's a word called both siding, which is ridiculous. Like, I think as a person, you need to look at all of the stories and all of the perspectives, or rather most, that you can be exposed to in order to get a full picture. If you're continuously just looking on, this side is the aggressor, this side is on the defensive, this side is the victim, it's life and wars, especially considering what Serbia has been through also, and in my past, especially my parents' past, these are real people, and these are real lives, and these are real stories being swept under the rug for the purpose of a massive agenda being upheld, again, on one side or the other side. So it's really fresh to hear, this perspective of Russians throughout the 20th century being displaced and commingled and intertwined with all of these countries, and being massive minorities which haven't had success in really integrating throughout the years. So
yes, and before we start shooting this on camera today, you told me that we live, in an attention economy.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree. And the black and white agenda that we see today in the mainstream media really fits into the attention economy, because it's easy to attract people on black and it's easy to attract people on white.
Super easy.
But it's really hard to attract them to think, and say that this is something gray. And you have to find your shade of gray on your own, because, that's complicated. I would say maybe it's a bit tough, but, fascism, right? It simplifies everything.
Yeah.
And I think the world we live in is getting towards this neo-fascism, because everything is tried to be oversimplified, and just the right answer is given to you by the internet.
Ooh, I hope you're wrong. I hope that we don't end up on that road, because that would be a very bleak road to walk on. But yeah, to your point, I think, you cannot paint gray in a 15-second short format clip, which is reposted, reshared, liked, commented on for infinity. So Vlad, thank you so much for the conversation today, man. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. That was a pleasure to me talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks.